Okay, I'll try to do something that is not fair to the author of this book because we went far ahead that we planned and I want to respect everyone's time. So this book, unlike the previous one, was written by a scholar. I don't think he was a Christian, but still, that doesn't matter. His last name is Zanger, and the book is called The Flood from Heaven. I'm just going to read a few stuff and we can comment on them and then we can give the concluding thoughts and be done. He says, for example, although Plato realized the secondary nature of the account, which right he received from those who came before him in his family structure, Plato appears to have been fully convinced of its accuracy. If Plato's suggested transmission is correct, the 2,500-year-old confusion around Atlantis may have been resulted from a simple misunderstanding between two very old men, Solon and the Saitian priest, right, the guy in Egypt, who were chatting about history and were not quite able to comprehend the meaning of their stories. Solon was fascinated by the story only because he was misguided. This is again according to the author of this book, Zanger. If he had realized that the priest was speaking about the Trojan War, he would perhaps not have taken notes of the conversation in his diary. Okay. Um, According to my interpretation, Zanger's, the story of Atlantis is largely a description of Troy and its peak period corresponding to Troy 6 around 1300 BC, as observed from a foreigner's perspective. The Greek opponents of the Atlanteans were the Achaeans. Their culture is sketched at its zenith as well. But the demise, accompanied by the earthquake and flood, was also recorded in the account. Sound geological and archaeological observations introduced in this book provide evidence of such natural disasters at the onset of this collapse. These events, however, were limited to the Argive plain, the center of the Mycenaean culture, and by themselves they have not suffered to overthrow a healthy community. And as we know, Troy was a city-state located in Asia Minor, which is today's Turkey, and it was at one point of time conquered by the Greeks, right? I want to read a few more or several more quotations by him. There are two principal ways to interpret Plato's story of Atlantis. Either it is predominantly an historical account, with presumably some distortions, or it represents fiction probably based in some measure on fact. No one, however, has been able to argue convincingly in which of these two major groups Plato's report belongs. The two major obstacles prevented a plausible interpretation of the Atlantis legend. Firstly, the enormously diverse expertise required to investigate the account, entailing disciplines such as ancient history, philology, archaeology, and paleogeography. And second, the conventional preconceptions and patterns of thought. And he quotes that last one. He also mentions what you mentioned, Kevin, that the supposed lost continent of Atlantis, has been taught by different people to be in different parts of the world. Netherlands, Bahamas, Tunisia, Mongolia, Malta, Iran, Australia, Ceylon, Brazil, Prussia, North and South America, South Africa, Morocco, Nigeria, Portugal, Spain, Greenland, and so on and so on. Wow. Okay. He says at least one third of the authors infer an historic foundation in Plato's report. Most non believers, so two-thirds, however, just consider the account as a fine piece of literature fiction without elaborating on their arguments, frequently admitting that the most obvious reading of the text would be as a factual account. So, again, according to this report in this book, two-thirds of the scholars, people who have seriously attacked this issue, they think that this is a fiction. Okay. Atlantis is depicted as a bizarre, even barbaric looking place. Barbaric is put in quotations, where cultic rituals culminated in the brutish cutting up of bulls and the burning of their extremities. And as we said, this, in our view, as people of faith, people who have studied religion and mythologies, this is not an issue for us. On the contrary, if it just supports what we read before, this
Hmm.
is not an issue for us to think this is a fiction. Because last week we talked about Cthulhu. That's fiction, even though there's some spiritual resemblances to the forces of dark. But this, you know, this I don't think it's fictional, at least this aspect. Okay.
Right.
He says Plato regularly used fictitious dialogues, incorporating existing people for pedagogic purposes. So he's speaking about Plato's accounts and writings in general, and this is what I read elsewhere before. That Plato used to he used to invent stories for the purpose of sending a message. So he would create some stories that didn't really happen, but he would try to send a certain message through these invented dialogues. Okay. Putting imaginary speeches in the mouth of historic characters was a common exercise in his time, practiced by others as well. Nevertheless, considering Plato's abilities and reputation, he must have been trying to set an example in this technique. Okay. There's this scholar, John Victor Luce, who said Plato's method consists in accumulating materials rather than fabricating them. So this scholar says differently, and he's quoting again in the same book. So John Victor Luce also says that Plato constructs his account from the resources of a well-stocked mind, not some erratic imagination. Okay, so we see scholars who agree and disagree, which is it's fine.